When you witness an accident or face an immediate threat, you instinctively reach for your phone to dial three specific digits to summon police, fire, or medical rescue. Yet the universal, nationwide emergency number we rely on today was not introduced in the United States until 1968. Before that defining year, reaching the right dispatcher during a crisis was a chaotic gamble that cost countless lives. Who finally decided how you call for help, and how did they force thousands of fragmented jurisdictions to adopt a single system? The creation of this universal lifeline was not just a technological upgrade, it was a fierce bureaucratic battle over who controls the infrastructure of public safety. To understand the magnitude of this shift, you have to look at how Americans summoned help throughout the first half of the 20th century. If your house caught fire in 1950, you could not simply dial a universal code. Instead, you had to pick up your rotary phone and dial 0 for the local operator. You would then frantically explain your location and the nature of your emergency to a telephone company employee. That operator, staring at a massive physical switchboard, had to figure out which specific firehouse, police precinct, or hospital covered your exact street. This manual routing process was dangerously slow and heavily dependent on the operator's local geographical knowledge. If you were traveling or had recently moved, you might not even know which town's operator you were speaking to. In rural areas, shared party lines meant you might have to interrupt your neighbor's conversations just to report a heart attack. The problem was compounded by the sheer number of autonomous emergency departments operating across the country. A single metropolitan area could have dozens of independent police forces and volunteer fire brigades, each with its own direct 7-digit phone number. Citizens were encouraged to memorize these lengthy local numbers or keep them written on a piece of paper taped to their telephone base. If you lost that piece of paper in the dark or amidst the panic of an emergency, your only recourse was the general operator. The United States was actually decades behind the curve in solving this systemic flaw. Over in Europe, Great Britain had already recognized the deadly inefficiency of operator-routed emergency calls following a tragic London fire. By 1937, the British government had successfully implemented 999 as a dedicated emergency code for the entire capital. This system automatically triggered a flashing red light and a loud buzzer at the telephone exchange. It ensured that operators answered those critical calls before any routine connections. Despite the proven success of the British model, American telecommunications monopolies and local governments resisted a similar nationwide rollout. The United States was vastly larger, with a highly decentralized political structure that fiercely protected local control over police and fire services. American telephone infrastructure was also overwhelmingly dominated by the Bell system, managed by AT&T. This private monopoly argued that re-engineering thousands of mechanical switching stations across a continent to recognize a universal 3-digit code was financially unfeasible. Instead of a unified number, some American cities experimented with fragmented solutions during the 1950s. Los Angeles implemented a unified police dispatch number, while other towns installed hardwired call boxes on street corners specifically for fire reporting. But these telegraph fireboxes required you to run outside and physically pull a lever, offering no way to request an ambulance or report a robbery. The nation remained a patchwork of isolated emergency networks, completely unsuited for an increasingly mobile post-war population. The tipping point arrived in the 1960s, an era defined by rising crime rates, civil unrest, and a massive expansion of the interstate highway system. As Americans spent more time traveling far from their home telephone directories, the impossibility of knowing every local emergency number became a visible public crisis. Medical professionals began publishing alarming studies showing that trauma victims were dying unnecessarily because of delays in summoning ambulances. Fire chiefs and police associations started lobbying the federal government, demanding a streamlined communication network to cut down response times. The pressure on the telephone monopoly was mounting, setting the stage for a historic federal intervention. In 1967, the mounting pressure finally materialized into a formal federal mandate. The President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice published a comprehensive printed report on the state of public safety. This landmark document explicitly recommended the establishment of a single universal telephone number for reporting police emergencies across the entire nation. Federal regulators immediately seized upon this recommendation. In November of 1967, the Federal Communications Commission summoned executives from the American Telephone and Telegraph Company for a pivotal meeting. The federal government gave the telecommunications monopoly an ultimatum to design and implement a nationwide emergency telephone code. Realizing that federal legislation might force a costly, poorly designed system upon them, telecommunications executives shifted their strategy. They decided to proactively design the system themselves to maintain control over their massive hardware infrastructure. The company tasked its internal engineers with finding a 3-digit sequence that could work across millions of miles of existing copper wire. The selection of the specific digits was entirely dictated by the physical limitations of mechanical telephone switching equipment. Engineers reviewing the North American numbering plan map realized they needed a code that had never been used as an area code or a local exchange prefix. Because the numbers 9 and 1 had not been assigned as the first 2 digits of any regional office code, the sequence 911 was mathematically available. The choice was also carefully optimized for the physical design of the standard rotary telephone dial. The engineering schematics for the dial mechanism showed that dialing a 9 required the finger wheel to travel almost the full circumference, which drastically reduced the chance of accidental dialing. Conversely, the number 1 required the shortest possible pull, allowing the final 2 digits to be entered rapidly during a panic. Implementing this new code required physically rewiring the central office routing architecture. Technicians had to manually solder new connections on the massive crossbar switching frames inside local telephone exchanges. These new relay pathways were programmed to recognize the specific pulse sequence and immediately divert the call to a dedicated emergency desk, bypassing the general operator entirely. In January of 1968, the telephone monopoly officially announced that 911 would become the universal emergency number for the United States. The company promised to absorb the central office modification costs, but left local municipalities to figure out how to staff and fund the actual dispatch centers. This created an immediate, chaotic race among local politicians eager to claim the title of the first operational emergency system. The giant telecommunications monopoly assumed the first deployment would happen in a major controlled market, but an independent telephone company in the South acted faster. The president of the Alabama Telephone Company read about the national announcement and decided to beat the massive conglomerate at its own game. He ordered his technicians to work around the clock to modify their local switching equipment. On February 16, 1968, the nation's first official 911 call was placed in the small town of Haleyville, Alabama. The historical logbook of the Haleyville Police Department recorded that the ceremonial call was made by the Speaker of the Alabama House of Representatives from a local city hall office. It was answered at the police station by a local congressman, proving that the technology worked perfectly on independent hardware. Despite this triumphant demonstration, the nationwide rollout was agonizingly slow and fraught with jurisdictional battles. A single 3-digit code was easy to program, but organizing local emergency responders to share a single dispatch room was a political nightmare. Police chiefs and fire captains fiercely protected their independent budgets and deeply distrusted the idea of civilian dispatchers answering their calls. The fundamental flaw of the early 911 system was a geographic mismatch between telephone exchanges and municipal borders. Telephone wire networks were built to maximize commercial efficiency, often crossing county and city lines haphazardly. A single central telephone office might route calls for 3 different towns, making it impossible to automatically direct an emergency call to the correct local police station. Dispatchers answering these early calls faced a terrifying blind spot. If a caller collapsed or was unable to speak after dialing, the operator had absolutely no way to know where to send the ambulance. The physical switchboard could only indicate that a call was coming from a broad regional zone, not a specific house. To solve this deadly limitation, telecommunications engineers in the 1970s developed enhanced 911. This upgraded system relied on a new mechanical process called automatic number identification. When a distressed citizen dialed the 3 digits, the switching equipment generated a specialized analog frequency tone. This tone carried the caller's specific 7-digit telephone number directly to the dispatch center. The receiving equipment decoded the tone and printed the caller's phone number onto a paper ticker tape log. For the first time, emergency operators had a verifiable way to call someone back if the line was abruptly disconnected. But a phone number alone could not dispatch a fire truck. The system needed a way to instantly cross-reference that incoming number with a physical street address. This required the creation of a massive, centralized database known as the Master Street Address Guide. Local governments were forced to undertake a monumental physical auditing project. Tax assessors and civil engineers had to manually map every single street, rural route, and property boundary into a standardized digital ledger. This master guide linked every telephone number to an exact physical location and its corresponding emergency service zone. This integration created the final mechanical step known as automatic location identification. When a call arrived, the automated dispatch computer queried the Master Street Address Guide database in real time. The caller's exact home address and the designated police precinct instantly populated on the dispatcher's glowing green digital terminal monitor. This technological leap fundamentally shifted the balance of power in municipal government. Independent, fragmented police and fire departments were forced to consolidate their communications into unified public safety answering points. Local chiefs lost their autonomous dispatch operations, surrendering control to centralized county administrators. To fund this massive infrastructure upgrade, state legislatures authorized a new financial mechanism. They implemented a dedicated emergency service surcharge, directly levying a small monthly tax on every citizen's telephone bill. The telecommunications companies won a lucrative, guaranteed revenue stream to maintain the network they had designed. By the late 1980s, the system had achieved critical mass, transforming from a scattered experiment into a nationwide standard. The mass adoption of this unified network fundamentally changed public behavior, transforming emergency response from a local favor into a guaranteed civic right. The 3-digit code became ingrained in early childhood education, turning ordinary citizens into the first link in the rescue chain. However, the system's reliance on fixed physical addresses created an unforeseen vulnerability. The transition into the 21st century brought the cellular phone revolution, untethering callers from the Master Street Address Guide. When you dial 911 from a mobile device, no copper wire physically links you to a specific house. Instead, the emergency network must triangulate your signal using surrounding commercial cell towers. This digital estimation process is significantly less precise than the old hardwired registries, often dropping callers into the wrong regional dispatch center. Engineers are still scrambling to patch this modern gap, attempting to force smart devices to transmit exact satellite coordinates directly to dispatchers. This evolution forces us to weigh a modern dilemma regarding our personal data. Would you prefer emergency systems to have permanent, unyielding access to your device's exact geographic coordinates? Or should privacy protocols restrict location tracking even at the risk of slower response times? The infrastructure of our daily survival is rarely accidental. It is the result of invisible battles over jurisdiction, technology, and human behavior. To uncover more hidden histories of the systems, laws, and institutions that silently govern your world, subscribe to our channel.